All right. Got it. All right. We're here for our Friday book reading for chapter 9. I'm going to start with a statement of unity, and then Brother Shimako is going to start reading for us. I'm just going to get into it, I think, right?
Yes.
All right. So the preface is the U.S. was founded as a colonial settler state based upon white supremacy and slavery, stealing the lands of indigenous nations, breaking every treaty made with them, and confining them to reservations or concentration camps. As the country became more powerful, the eagle sunk its claw into other nations, making war on Mexico, grabbing its northern territory, invading Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines, and either annexing them outright or making them colonies or neo-colonies. And in the 20th century, it became the major imperialist power in the world, exploiting both the people within its boundaries and those in every other country, bullying them with military interventions and robbing them of their right to self-determination. As Huey P. Newton stated, we have two enemies to fight, racism and capitalism. Between the two, capitalism is primary, racism is a byproduct of capitalism. The working people of the world of every ethnicity and nationality face a common enemy that is destroying life on Earth. Our enemy is a small ruling class of property owners controlling most of the world's wealth and resources. We must have our basic needs met in a good and meaningful life. Food, shelter, healthcare, education, freedom from oppression by the state, and peace with other nations. To obtain these essential things for life, we must have the power to see to it that the abundance that is available is shared equitably. Now, a statement of unity for the Second Rainbow Coalition. The legacy of the First Rainbow Coalition dates back to its founding on April 4th, 1969 by the original Black Panther Party, original Young Lords, and Young Patriots organization. A number of other organizations joined this coalition not too long afterwards, such as the American Indian Movement, Brown Berets Rising Up Angry, the Red Guards, and others. Since the founding of the United States, the masses had developed a number of popular movements that came together to fight back against this capitalist imperialist system in various ways around particular demands. Nevertheless, none had established a movement quite like the First Rainbow Coalition. This historic movement was the first of its kind that established a model of class struggle like no other. Its charismatic leader, Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the original Black Panther Party, stated, "At the end of the day, we weren't engaged in a race struggle." He said, "It's a class struggle, goddammit." By uniting with the various oppressed ethnicities and masses, they were able to bridge the gap between various ethnic communities that white supremacy had long sought to keep divided. This class solidarity equipped them with a material basis and class consciousness to see their common class oppression. Therefore, the necessity to form a united front against their common class oppressor. The capitalist imperialist ruling class, the ruling class viewed this as the greatest threat to their class rule, and subsequently used the entire repressive forces of the state, police, courts, jails, prison, and intelligence agencies, etc., in order to crush this emerging revolutionary socialist movement. We refounded the Rainbow Coalition on May 14th, 2021, with the intent of upholding the legacy of the original Rainbow Coalition. We believe that this historic example is the model for the united front that will best serve our class liberation. By upholding the 10-point program of the original Black Panther Party, which was subsequently adopted and later expanded by the original Young Lords, Young Patriots organization, and all other Rainbow Coalition members, we established our programmatic unity. The 6 disciplinary rules that we uphold ties all organizations in our coalition to a common professional discipline. History has bestowed upon our generation a common class mission to fulfill. The representatives of the capitalist imperialist ruling class represented by the Democratic and Republican Party cannot liberate us. It is their class intention and interest to uphold our common class oppression. Therefore, it is only we, the oppressed masses of all ethnicities and nationalities, who must build the necessary class solidarity, class consciousness, and organizational structures in the united front that will ultimately liberate ourselves. This is what the Second Rainbow Coalition is committed to. This is the historic mission we intend to fulfill. Dare to struggle, dare to win. All power to the people, boots on the ground. The members of the coalition are the New African Black Panther Party, the White Panther Party, the Green Party of New Jersey, Poor People's Army, La Mesa Nacional de Brown Berets, Fury, NASO, and the New Era Young Lords, and Guardian Rebellion. Our 6 disciplinary rules are that the members will conduct themselves in a manner to bring credit to the coalition and will treat each other with respect and politeness. Members will be sober when on Rainbow Coalition business and will not engage in any criminal activity while a member. 3, no member will engage in violence except in the extremity of self-defense. 4 members will not gossip or be divisive to the unity of the Second Rainbow Coalition. 5 members will not act as informers nor work against the purpose of the Second Rainbow Coalition. And 6, nobody is authorized to speak for the Second Rainbow Coalition unless authorized to do so. All right, Brother Shamako, go ahead.
I just want to say, rule number 5 is kind of wild. It's like, it's almost never, I mean, it's pretty much never going to happen that somebody's going to be like, oh, for real? Oh, my bad. I was planning on informing on y'all. All right, then, I'm out. But, I mean, I guess it's good that we have it in there, though.
Hey, if they violate the rule, then we have something to call them on.
Right. Rule
number 5.
Always get to have a point to cover. You gotta be like, y'all didn't say I couldn't snitch. But anyway, so having covered that point. All right, so I'm going to just offer this up again. If anyone else would like to start the reading, I don't mind. I just don't want to hog the space.
I would like to say something real quick, man.
Yes, other.
I would like to read, man, but you know, in my screen, I only could see like half of the stuff. So if I was to start reading, I'll get all confused. But by the time I get to the ending of the sentence, I can't see that. You see what I'm saying?
Do you need it to be bigger?
I don't know if it's bigger or what. Because I got the screen, the whole screen here, but I don't know what that means by bigger. But I don't see, you know, it's like the last sentence is connected to where we at now in our pictures.
Hold on one second. Or try something.
Hey, Brother Chad, you can also expand your screen by taking your 2 fingers and just tap the screen and opening it up.
So I don't know if that made it. I tried to increase the size on my screen. I don't know if that's reflected in what you guys see.
So see, like in the second hour, it said in a lot of ways the year before have begun shaping up, and I can't see the next word. I can't see it.
Oh, is everybody having that problem?
Are you on the computer?
Yeah, I'm on a computer.
I think it might be the way that his Zoom is set up on the screen, but I don't know. I'm not used to seeing it like that. So like he might need to like open the full view and not be able to see us.
I
It
got
sounds
the
like he
full
might have.
view.
Do you have but you said you have us in the same view?
Yeah, I got y'all on the right-hand side, but it cuts off some words. So if I was to
You can move it.
Huh?
You can move the picture. Take your finger and touch the image of us, that picture, and you can move the screen.
Oh,
Well, your mouse.
Okay. Anticipated. Let me see something. Well, now I can see in the summer of 1993, I entered Pike High School as a freshman. I had anticipated this, and right there it stops. Monday?
Yeah, I'm trying to see how he can delete the picture of us. You know what I'm saying?
I moved y'all to the left-hand side of the screen.
Yeah,
so
but it's
now,
jumping. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Minimize your screen.
okay.
Do the same thing.
I think he needs to zoom out. So are you in Google Chrome right now, Jorge?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Yeah, I'm on Google Drive or something.
Okay, so you see where the address is, where the URL is at the top? Do you have a little magnifying glass with a plus sign in it?
Yeah.
Click that. Well, tell me what the number is.
175.
All right, so pull it out, pull it outward. Like click minus to see what happens.
Now, I had anticipated this moment.
Yep,
This
there you go.
moment. It says the first hour, I had anticipated this moment the whole previous year. That's what that means?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I got it then, if that's
Bet.
the case.
All right, let us proceed.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You want me to read it? You want me to start reading?
Please.
Okay. It'll be a pleasure to do so. I do all reading all day long, read Marxism all day. In the summer in the summer of 1993, I didn't say 90, but I entered Pipe High School as a freshman. I had anticipated this moment the whole previous year. In a lot of ways, the year before had begun shaping the person I was becoming true. The year before, I pointed my first pistol at a dude, making him fear for his life. I wanted people to both fear and love me. My ambition to create a reputation in the streets was just emerging. On the flip side of that coin, I still have my hoop dreams. I wanted to one day play for the Michigan Wolverines and then go on to play in the NBA. I want to be a basketball star who was loved and respected by my peers and strangers alike. These two ambitions were contradictory and became warring fractions within me. Let me see if I could raise this. Okay, underneath those dissimilar aspirations were fueled by civil social contradictions. By the time I reached high school, my Christian faith formed an integral part of my social being. Although I fully believe it to be true, I wrestle with its application within my life. Wow, now I can't see the rest because it's covered. God, man. Wait a minute. Let me see if I could. No, I can't move that. Okay. What happened here? Okay, put it over here. Okay, let me see if I could. Okay, I'm trying to see if I could raise that up so I could continue reading, but I don't know. I don't want to hold up.
No, you're doing fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you, sister.
Yeah. On the screen, it should be underneath. Is it show that?
What is that?
On
Yeah, it shows it. Yeah.
Just start from there.
Underneath those dissimilar aspirations were fueled by civil social contradictions. By the time I reached high school, my Christian faith formed an integral part of my social being. Although I fully believed it to be true, I wrestled with its application within my life, while also increasing feeling angry that I was forced to endure this cosmic battle between God and the devil. Oh God. This part of my struggle often caused me to feel suicidal and developed a strong contempt for life. I wrestle with depression often because of this. Okay, beautiful, thank you. This was also fed by a feeling of in-betweenness that came from me now living in the suburbs, but living a suburban life financially. I knew what I felt like having to go to school wearing the same 5 pairs of clothes, sounds like me, each week for most of the school year, mixing and matching them to appear like I had more than I really had, while witnessing other kids come to school wearing the latest fashionable and trendy clothes and shoes. Ironically, I would often feel compelled to voice this more vocally when I found myself with my peers who stayed in the hood. Because of our zip code, people will assume that we were better off and suburban across the board. They might have even had better clothes and shoes than me and my siblings, but would still make it seem like their life was much harder than ours. In many cases, it might have been, but to a large extent, I knew it was more similar than they tried to make it out to be. This often got under my skin because I knew we were living paycheck to paycheck. Example, my parents. As for us, we were living child support to child support. Example, okay, whatever my mom would give us, most of the time we were able to maybe buy some ice cream along with our lunch at school or something, but nothing to stunt about. I remember the times we would break into our parents' room when they weren't home with a butter knife to get to the cereal and extra food they would keep in their bedroom. There was a big contrast to me whenever I would go over a friend's house, who I won't name, but who had a food pantry with such a wide selection of cereal and snacks that it could damn near been converted into a small convenience store. Oh God, as ridiculous as it may seem to me. Now, I remember getting into arguments with kids from the hood about who had it worse. This would often lead to me getting into arguments with my mom about moving back to the hood. So I would have more. I remember many times.
We're at the bottom. I remember many times.
I remember many times telling my moms, so and so lives in the hood and they get more than us. Why don't we just move back to the hood so we would have more? Would be serious as a heart attack whenever I confronted my moms about the social contradictions between how we were living compared to how I felt people should live if they wanted to move out into the suburbs. I knew my mom just wanted to give us a better environment to grow up in than she had. But I also knew she didn't know what it was like to be the first generation to move out of the hood and experience the feeling of in-betweenness from all directions. I wasn't necessarily a suburban kid, nor a hood kid. I felt in between these two poles by being the first out of the hood. This was a social contradiction that in time made me search for my Black manhood from a more unbalanced, urban-centric perspective of life, instead of viewing things from a class analysis. The suburbs came to symbolize being white, while the hood symbolized being Black and being a real nigga.
All right, stop right there, Jorge. I want to
No problem.
thank you very much. Appreciate you, Elder. I want to open up. I want to open up the floor for discussion. So, any comments or thoughts on that section?
Yeah, I have a comment to that. It remind me of my when I was growing up, but I wasn't like that. I was never in the suburbs. I was in the hood in Brooklyn, and there was times in my life where I'll go to school, looking at with clothes, man, that all raggedy clothes, I'll say. And my sneakers. I used to wear a lot of sneakers and a hat. And kids would look at me, you know, and they never made a comment because you know, I always display a hell of a behavior, man. You know, like a tough kid, and kids didn't just want to get caught up in a situation where I would wind up punching them in the face. So they never said anything. But I knew that they talked about me, you know, the way I dressed. And I didn't have no money to buy no breakfast neither, you know, so there was times that I go to school, man, without eating. And so that was a problem. So yeah, I could identify with that, you know, what he went. Unfortunately, like I said, I never lived in the suburbs. My mother didn't have that money to put me in the suburbs. And even if I went to the suburbs, I grew up in the hood in Brooklyn, man. So I probably would have felt uncomfortable if I even moved to the suburbs.
Word.
I have a question. Like, so let me ask you, do y'all think that it would be better for children today in grade school to wear a uniform versus having street clothes to minimize the stigma of those who are less fortunate to have one of the latest and greatest type of clothing so they won't be ridiculed?
So before I answer that question, Lobo had his hand up, but I want to answer that question because that's a good question. Brother Lobo, and then anybody else, and then or who else? Everyone's
I'm sorry. Thank you for
No,
pointing that out, brother, because I don't see it.
Yeah, for sure.
No, you know what? That was a good question. I think we should talk about that in the night show. That was dope.
Mm-hmm. Because I noticed, yeah, because it's just a statement now because, you know, for us to come from humble beginnings where we were poor, you know, for me, you know, we have limited clothes, but rarely I will be dressed pretty in a dress. I would have on my jeans or clothes where I can just, you know, get down and put a hole in the kneecap area. Yeah, but I think that's like one of the things that's still going on in which kids are being bullied because of the fact that they cannot afford certain clothes, in which you know, they are always are teased, you can say. So yeah, that's my thing. Should all schools, grade schools, require every student to have a uniform, and for the school or the government or from private grants, you know, supplies those those students in a breakfast, I guess, club or group who get free food, you know, be entitled to a certain amount of uniform versus wearing street clothes.
All right, Brother Lobo, you want to pick that up? You can, you know, answer the question, or yeah, I know you had a comment.
Yeah, no, actually, two things. First thing is, I think Sister Anna hit the nail right on the head. It's interesting because, you know, me being an OG at almost 50 in the Brown Berets or whatever, obviously we have elders that have been in there since the beginning of the movement, but I can recall in the 80s, my family, and we all know the history of Texas, where I'm from. I mean, that motherfucker used to be Mexico, excuse my language. I remember in the 80s, we went from El Paso, Texas, which is like 80% Mexican and Chicano, and we moved to Austin, Texas. And we went to this brand new subdivision. My family had a house built. My grandparents were living with us, and my grandparents, my mom, my aunt and uncles, typical, you know, Chicanos, we're all living under one roof. But what we did is we put our money together to buy this big fat ass house in this new subdivision. And wouldn't you know, come to find out, we were like, why did they call this subdivision Convict Hill? and we would always pass by this rock quarry. And then I remember in school, they taught us the history of that area, that they actually used to take convicts, like in a chain gang, and break rocks at that rock quarry. And then, you know, back in the 80s, they didn't really know or understand the whole thing about gentrification, but the suburbs grew into that rock quarry, and that was the premier place to live. And so I'm thinking, damn, that's where I'm living at now. And then the school district, Austin Independent School District, I kid you not, as soon as me and my sisters enrolled, came to this program where they said, due to the gang violence, we're gonna have everybody wear khaki pants, and it could be Dickies, brown jeans, but like a khaki colored pants and a white shirt, white polos or whatever. And they said they did this because of the uptick in gang activity. And I remember my sister and I looking at each other like, there's nothing but white folks here. Like, what the hell are they talking about gangs? But we got enrolled into that school district at the same time that a Black family from Galveston, Texas enrolled. So, you know, as I'm getting older, I'm wondering, like, yeah, you know where I'm going with this. I'm like, oh, okay, so the Black and brown kids enrolled. Now y'all want to have uniforms, huh? But you know, it was a blessing in disguise, because, you know, my grandparents at the time, like, they would just buy whole outfits, and so we didn't have to worry about what we were gonna wear. That was the first thing I wanted to touch on. The second thing is, you know, I'm so appreciative that we're touching a little bit on mental health, behavioral health. If you recall earlier in the paragraph, he said that he was feeling a little suicidal or whatever. And honestly, I think Black, brown, and indigenous men especially, we got to talk about that. I don't know how many of these younger cats, these younger soldiers, they struggle with that. And we got to create space for them to be okay with their masculinity and talking about, look, bro, I don't really feel good right now. I'm not in a safe space. Okay, I'm not going to call you a puto or that you're fucking, you know, not a man. As a matter of fact, I'm going to think you more of a man. Let's talk it out. You need a hug? Like, what's up, dog? Like, we can't be losing these young revolutionaries to this idea of machismo. Like, that's got to die. This ain't 1955 no more. Like, that's got to die. And I know out of my own experience, just having so many young men, especially, that struggle with that, and they don't think that they can come forward and talk about that. And I think we got to create time and space for that to happen. And you know what's so interesting is, shout out to the female comrades, because I see it coming naturally. You get a bunch of female comrades in the room and they're like, hey, sister, how's it going? Like, they bond naturally. You get a bunch of us dudes in the room, we mad dogging each other. Like, come on, man. We got to change that. That's all I got to say.
Yeah.
Brother Elder Jorge, and then Sister Anna, and then I'll go after that.
You know, in reference to wearing uniforms in schools, when I was in the Dominican, I used to take my little granddaughter to school, and she had to have a uniform on. When I was in Puerto Rico, I used to see the kids going to school also with uniforms on. But I wonder about that, because those uniforms are not given. You got to buy them. And a lot of parents have to kick out the little bit of money that they have when it comes to school time to buy these uniforms for them. And every year, the uniforms have to be sort of like a little different. They're not the same every year. And so I wonder about that, you know, whether it'll be appropriate to have uniforms in the school, especially with poor people who can't even afford to buy those clothes. And they're expensive. They're not cheap. They're expensive.
Yeah. Sister Anna?
Yeah, I don't know if you see if my hand is raised or not. Really, I had nothing to say, but it all goes and tie in to exactly what is taking place now, to decrease or minimize bullying. It's a good point that Brother Lobo had mentioned about the greatest taboo that men need to hide their feelings, and they have been grown up to be silent when it's coming to their emotion. But I don't know if y'all heard the latest that as far as education is concerned, but I understand that one senator, what he wants to do is push I don't know if it's a bill, I was half awake, but I understand that now he wants children to work for what they need to get. Like, for instance, not so much of a uniform, but breakfast. If I don't know how he's going to work that out, but I understand it's here in Virginia, in which every child have to work for what they need to earn, which is ludicrous and insane. And I guess this is just switching the whole view about school, where now it's not going to be a type of institution that you come to, where the kids come to, where they will be faced with, something like bullying, but now they're going to just make it virtual. So that's my next question. Do you think by all academic curriculum being virtue would minimize the possibility of being bullied? So this way we can look at, I guess, the emotional point where people will not be traumatized from, with depression because of the high rate of being bullied.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll say a couple of things on that. So, yeah, first off, great discussion so far. On the uniforms, I feel kind of three different ways about it. One, I agree with Elder Jorge. I think that if you're gonna force uniforms, you have to have a process for families to get uniforms if they can't afford them without humiliating or demeaning themselves. Like that has to be built into the process. And I don't think institutions that force uniforms are. So it's funny, right? You think about the countries you mentioned, there's Puerto Rico, Cuba, China comes to mind. And I think of all those countries as inherently more class conscious and less inclined to implement uniforms in sort of a backwards, like the way, like when they implement uniforms, there's a class strategy behind it. And it's not like Brother Lobo described, like there's blacks and Mexicans moving in the neighborhood. We need to protect our kids. You know what I mean? And but then another way I think about it is, I imagine, I don't know style. So there's another dimension of style, right? Like style is it's an expression. I don't know. It's there's a value to it. I don't know. Maybe it is something that's for outside of learning institution, or maybe it's something that's for adults. But really, there's a lot of style that comes from youth that, like, historically speaking, I mean, and especially when it comes to Black and brown people, like I see you, listen, sorry if I missed you. Going all the way back to, whenever, I mean, I wouldn't want to take that away either, and sort of the third thing is, it's tricky, right? Because you talk about like bullying, gangs and stuff like that. Like there's a whole series of class analyses and racial and gender analyses that go into that. Kind of like back party stuff, right? Like gangs in Los Angeles weren't just gangs originally. They were protection units defending themselves from police officers that over time were infiltrated and pushed towards being gangs. Which, I mean, even with bullying, I mean, bullying is a problem, but part of why bullying is a problem is because the adults didn't take it seriously earlier until people started killing people. You know what I mean? Like maybe just take it seriously, like, which we're getting there now, but I think I'm talking a lot. So I want to pass to Alyssa, and then we should probably keep it moving unless anybody has something urgent.
No.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something after her, just briefly. Go ahead, sis.
Thank you. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to piggyback. Originally, I had my own thought process because I went to Catholic school up until 6th grade, but I was not like, I would say I was middle class, I guess, growing up. So I don't necessarily understand it as a child from a lower income perspective, if that makes sense. But I do understand it from a identity perspective, which is kind of what Shamaka was getting at, where it's more like about conforming and like making people fit a certain narrative. Like I went to school and like my principal literal, granted it was Catholic school, so also take this with a bit of a grain of salt, but like my principal would take off my nail polish because I refused to do it. Like we weren't allowed to wear necklaces, we weren't allowed to like have any type of self-expression, so like I would go to school like 4 ponytails just to look different than everybody else, you know what I mean? And then I finally somehow convinced my parents, I don't know how I pulled it off, but I convinced my parents that I was going to have culture shock when I went to high school. So I ended up in public middle school, and I was just like, holy shit, like I can do so many things. Like I was smoking cigarettes in the bathroom, you know what I mean? Like I was friends with everyone. Like it was like, holy crap, there's a whole world out here, you know? Also, one other thing that is more, not so much when I was a kid, but more so a thing now, is also like gender identity and gender expression. It would be questionable whether they like make or allow people to dress how they want to, or how they identify, I guess would probably be the best way to say that. Because they might say, you know, that you have to wear a dress if you are born a girl or whatever the case may be, and that generally ends up like putting people in very uncomfortable positions. But I can definitely understand it, or at least I can try to understand it from the perspective of like people being able to be seen as equal. I just, like Shamaka was saying, I don't think that necessarily in America that we have the class consciousness to not just like end up kind of seeming like there's a bunch of little Nazis walking the line all in the same form. I'm gonna stop talking now.
Oh, thank you. This is Sister Anna.
Just saying.
Yeah, I agree with you, sister. And it just comes down to you mentioned about being equal, and I agree with that. Where some kids don't want to stand out, because when I went to grade school, I lived in a notorious neighborhood where there have been presence of gangs, and we had to be careful of a certain type of color, where of course the neighborhood I live in, we could not wear red, blue, or white, like the flag colors. And I remember having that on, and this local gang took word of it, the Summarize, and they came to our school and they terrorized us, and they came into the schoolyard, and I mean they was tearing us up, and the principal came out. Let me tell you what this principal did. To make a long story short, she closed the door. She refused for us to come inside the school, and she said the cops will be called. And it's like we was locked in a cage, which was the backyard, because of the fact some kids was wearing these colors, and they was getting tore up from the floor up. And I happened to be one of the kids with those colors, where I was running for my life and fell in a pool of glass and busted my chin. I'm telling you, I lived rough. And I just couldn't believe that the principal had just locked us enclosed us right into the schoolyard that was like a cage so we could get our butts torn up, And I just remember that one scene where I'm like, just wearing street clothes shouldn't have been a thing, not only because of the fact, it prevents bullying, but obviously it prevents you being a target, So I just wanted to bring that out because that kind of reminded me of that time when I was in school and I had to be confronted with that.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna start the reading, but I just want to say, in a different era, that's like a $5 million lawsuit right there.
Right.
What you're talking about, that is gross negligence.
Absolutely.
She
She said a hell of a buzz.
All right, I'm gonna pick up from here, and then
Okay.
anybody wants to volunteer afterwards, they're more than welcome to. All right. This expressed itself in different forms throughout my high school years. In middle school,
What page?
hold on, I think is Zombie in the waiting room? Yep, there you go.
Okay, what page, brother? I
right.
lost track. What page you on?
Hold on. It is 101.
Okay.
101.
Okay.
Got it?
101 paragraph what?
This expressed itself.
I'll find it. Go ahead.
All right. This expressed itself in different forms throughout my high school years. In middle school, I had grown to view white girls in an exaggerated way. For me, I saw landing a pretty white girl as a greater acquisition than copping a pretty black girl. It wasn't something that I could consciously articulate, but the actions demonstrated that by how hard I tried to get a white girl's phone number versus a black girl's. I would have probably never admitted it, but once I moved around more white people, I began seeing white women as more sexually desirable and white people in general as smarter than black people. I would even go so far as to cheat off of a white person's test, even though I probably was smarter than most of the white people in my classes. As ironic as that may all seem, I realize now how W.E.B. Du Bois' double consciousness affects black people by simply being born black in America, not only racially, but in relation to class. He said, speaking about this two-ness, that it is a peculiar sensation. This, by the way, welcome, Zombie.
Thank you. Sorry I was late.
All good, glad to have you. He said, speaking about this two-ness, that it is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in an amused contempt and pity. One feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. For me, this is how that dialectical contradiction played out in my social being as I entered high school. The latter one, I had begun the process of overcoming. Instead of entering high school believing that white girls were more aesthetically beautiful than black women, I swung to the opposite extreme. One of my classmates by the name of Dion Miller had a great influence on me the year before. He was the first person I met who talked about Black pride and Black history with admiration. Before him, I don't think I ever heard the name Frederick Douglass uttered by anyone. He came at me like Ice Cube came at Omar Epps in the movie Higher Learning. Sorry, I had lines flash in my head. You behind enemy lines, dog. Sorry, okay, I just had to do it. All right. He really didn't make white people out to be devils or anything. He was more so giving me his dissertation of why we should be proud to be black. Since I was wrestling with several contradictions surrounding race relations, including how I began putting white women on an aesthetic pedestal, I came away from that conversation trying to convince myself that Black women were the most beautiful women in the world and held on to that view for all 4 years in high school. There was one time I remember even turning down sex with a white girl just because I didn't want to defile myself by being sexually intimate with a white girl. When I look back on that sort of way of thinking now, I see that that phase of my life was a necessary start to resolving a contradiction that was once integral to my feelings of self-hate and the inferiority complex which I had developed after moving to the suburbs. It made me understand others who I would come across later in life whenever they started wrestling with their own contradictions. I realized most things don't resolve themselves in a straight line process. Sometimes the pendulum swings to the opposite extreme until one's consciousness is more securely rooted within a healthy outlet. I think it's important to start from this premise so one can understand the various contradictions at work within me in order to comprehend the broader context of my actions and the internal struggles that drove my reckless actions at times. Like many teenagers, I was on a journey to find an identity which was often elusive even to me. Let's just break there. Any thoughts?
Mm.
Nothing major on that. All right. So we'll keep rolling. We'll come back. Right before I began high school, I started working at a retirement home called Robin Run. My first paid job, I was making $4.25 an hour bussing tables. Not too long afterwards, my guy, Clarence from the neighborhood, started working there with me. I wasn't making a lot of money, but it lessened the tension between my mom and I over how our child support was being allocated. Now I had my own money where I could buy my own clothes and shoes and began saving up to get my first car. After working there for a while, me and Clarence both moved up to waiting tables like all the other waiters and waitresses. I liked it because the job wasn't too far from our housing complex, and most of the other people who worked our part-time shift attended the same high school as us. Senior citizens who lived there were mostly friendly and took a liking to us. Occasionally, you would come across some who were assholes. I noticed that most of the elderly people who lived there were white. Robin Run definitely catered to retired people who had been upper middle class and could afford to retire comfortably. I didn't give class and social status much thought back then, but I did notice that few Black people lived there. I figured that most elderly Black people couldn't afford to stay in a place like that after they retired. When school finally started, I came in ready to be a freshman. All 4 grades attended the same building, so we were quickly initiated in our first few weeks by the upperclassmen. Anytime a pack of them caught us by ourselves, only a few of us together, they would jump us or send us running down the hallway to escape their pursuit. After getting ambushed and humiliated a few times in front of girls who we liked, we all wised up and started to roam the hallways in between classes in packs. More times than not, this wouldn't necessarily deter the upperclassmen from coming at us, but it did even up the odds, so we couldn't be humiliated all that bad. A few times we had caught a few of them off guard and turned the tables on them. This lasted a few weeks into the school year before they started to leave us alone. It was all fun and games, though, because most of the upperclassmen would only pick on you if they really liked you and saw you as one of the cool kids too. Anybody else like to read?
For a little bit.
Alyssa, is that you?
Yep.
Oh, word.
All right. Homecoming my freshman year was an embarrassing one for me, to say the least. After the game, I was waiting on my ride to pick me and my cousin up. She also attended Pike with me. Well, one of the older guys rode past us in a car while we waited on the sidewalk. I don't remember the details of that night. I just remember that words were exchanged. I had assumed that this was a continuation of some upper class horseplay shit. Instead, this guy by the name of TC, who was a junior, got out of his car and hit me square in the face. I immediately saw stars and grabbed him. His punch totally caught me off guard. For some reason, he thought I had thrown a rock at his car. I think I did act like I picked up a rock and threw it at his car, but I was only playing. There was no loud bang or anything indicated that I had actually done so. So when he actually punched me in the face, I was unprepared to defend myself. I remember my cousin Chanel running up and breaking it up immediately. TC said something and jumped into his car and sped off. I was so embarrassed. The fact that Tanisha Freeman, the girl who I had been infatuated with since first laying my eyes on her in middle school, had witnessed me get my ass whooped, I felt extremely humiliated. To make matters worse, I had to go to school with a black eye for about 3 weeks. After that situation, or be humiliated like that by anyone ever again. I had the opportunity to get TC whooped by out of all people, the guy Brad we had stolen our first gun from. He had heard what had happened to me. At one of our basketball varsity games, he had approached me and told me to point out who had done that to me and he would fuck their ass up. Mind you, this was a street cat with a clique of motherfuckers with him. He didn't even go to our school. He went to Northwest High School. He was just tight with my cousin Ronnie and Carlos and was going to handle it because I was their little cousin. Coincidentally, I actually saw TC at a distance at the basketball game as he was talking to me. Instead of pointing him out, though, I just told Brad I would definitely let him know if I saw him at the game. I didn't want anyone to fight my beef for me, so I let it go. I think it was about a year later that TC and his family moved into our neighborhood. We ended up being cool and never even talked about what happened that night. In fact, his brother Ron was the first in our neighborhood to get his own car, so we rode with him back and forth to school. I ended up making the freshman B League basketball team that year. That was hard to swallow, especially watching Tyrone Robinson excel. He even got a chance to play in a few varsity games his freshman year, after performing so well in his junior varsity games. I was definitely proud of him and everyone else I came up playing with, who was making a name for themselves. It just felt like my hoop dreams were becoming less and less tangible. The end of my freshman year ended with me breaking my wrist during gym class. We probably had less than a few weeks of school left when I caught a pass during flag football in the air and came down wrong. My right hand, wrist, and forearm formed it in a Z pattern. Oof. That's how bad I had fucked it up. Then, to make matters worse, my mom had picked me up from school to take me to the hospital. But when we got there, she realized that my doctor bill was going to be too high. So we left the first hospital she took me to on the north side of Indianapolis, and we finally ended up at Methodist Hospital downtown. I think several hours had passed before we even went to surgery. Most of that summer I spent in a cast. The only positive thing that came from me breaking my arm was that it would force me to learn how to play with my left hand a lot better. I don't think I had ever scored layups with my left hand or even drove left. After that summer, when my cast came off, I was a lot better at basketball because of it. Before my sophomore year started, I got into it with my mom and stepdad. I had had enough. I wanted to go stay with my father, and he had recently remarried, stayed not too far from our house. My mom didn't want me to leave, but I was being very disruptive to the cohesion of the household. For several years, I started to turn against my stepfather and take my biological father's side on any dispute between my mother and father. I even began enlisting my other siblings into my quarrels with my parents. I tried to make them believe that our stepfather wasn't our father and tried to turn them against him. One night it boiled over and my mom called up my father and told him that she was bringing me and my brother to him. Instead, my stepfather drove my brother and I to my father's house. When I exited the car, I took what was left of my TV dinner and threw it at his face. I didn't care if I ever lived with my mom and him again. I think a few days passed before my brother went back to stay with my mom while I stayed with my biological father for the first time in my life. My sophomore year was crazy for me. It seemed like Pike had fights every week for the first several months. I witnessed this girl named Nicole beat the fuck out of this one sister in the hallway. She literally dragged her by the hair, punching her until a teacher jumped in and broke up the fight. Not too long after that fight, someone had stole $188 out of my gym locker. Back then, that was a lot of money. It probably took me 2 weeks, if not more, to save up that much money. I was still working at Robin Run part-time. That was all the money I had. It wasn't until later that night that I found out who had got me. I called a friend that evening to tell him what had happened to me at school that day. And that's when he told me that JR was bragging about a come up he had made. He said he was going around smoking weed with everybody and bragging to anyone who would listen. I couldn't believe it. I had never suspected JR for one moment, even though he was the most likely suspect. He was the only person who shared that gym locker with me and knew my combination. After it came up missing, he gave me my lunch money that day and everything because he felt bad for me. This is a guy who I would give my lunch money to anytime he asked for or needed it. This is a person I hung out with every day and I called my friend. When my father got off of work that day, I told him what had happened. I asked him if he could take me over to the Apple apartment so I could fight JR and get my money back. To my surprise, he told me that he couldn't, as if he had something more important to do. When he told me what it was, that's when I started to lose respect for the first time for my biological father. He told me that my stepmother wanted him to go to Long John Silver's and pick up a platter for her. What? That was more important than helping me get my money back? I could buy his white wife 100 platters. I couldn't believe my ears. I knew she really didn't like the fact of me moving in with them, but I just didn't dig how he would seem to put her above us all the time. Even though I never voiced it, I didn't really like the fact that my dad had married a white woman in the first place. Again, I had started viewing interracial relationships differently when I stopped putting white girls on pedestals and began admiring black girls more. I figured he was just using her to move out the hood. So I never made a fuss about it. But when he started to put her before us, that's when I started feeling different about him and her. Since he refused to take me, I decided to wait until the next day at school to catch up with JR. The following day at school, I went through the first half of the day, patiently waiting for my lunch period to arrive. I normally bought a lunch tray and kicked it with my friends throughout the entire lunch period. This particular day, I really had little words for anybody. I don't think I had told anyone my plan. I remember towards the end of lunch, I asked the person sitting next to me for his empty tray. After picking it up, I went several rows behind the table that JR was sitting at. When I noticed he wasn't paying any attention, I approached him from the back and tapped him on his shoulder. As soon as he turned around, I swung the tray at his face with all my might. Do you want me to finish until that little bar?
Yes.
Okay. The tray shattered in every direction. After that, I started to rain down blows into the back of his head and to the back inside of his head. I never gave him a chance to regroup. I kept punching and punching until one of the male teachers grabbed me and pulled me off of him.
All
When
right.
they sorry.
Keep going.
Okay. When they escorted me into the principal's office, they told him what I had done. He kind of found it amusing himself. I think he offered me some orange juice and donuts, if I'm not mistaken. To have done what I had done, it seemed like all the staff found what I had done more amusing than anything. I remember the principal even apologizing to me for having to arrest me. I told him what had driven me to do that to him, but he said that I had used a weapon and he said he had to send me to juvenile. I told him that I understood and turned around and allowed the school police officer to cuff me. Up until this time, I had never been arrested or seen the inside of a juvenile building. I knew where it was because we had passed it many times before, but to actually be fingerprinted and have my picture taken was all something new to me. Since it was my first time, they released me on my own recognizance, and when my dad picked me up, I only sat in the holding cell for about 4 hours before my dad came and got me. I didn't know it at the time, but that incident would be the start of a reputation that I wanted to expand and maintain.
All right, floor is open. Any
That was,
thoughts?
that was a lot. I can definitely resonate with the dad and the stepdad battle for sure, 100%. That was a huge part of my reality growing up.
Yeah, I also I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt if you were still going.
No.
Yeah. So there were a few things that I resonated with in this section. So definitely just the two family structure and all that comes with it. And like whoever you're beefing with at the time, however you're beefing with them. And I feel like I kind of beef with both sides. I definitely beef with Pops. And I don't know, like he wasn't really my stepdad, he was my mom's boyfriend or whatever, but I remember one time I got caught stealing a porn magazine from like Tower Records or whatever, and he picked me up, and that was a moment where he was like a cool dude or whatever. But he was like, I felt like my mom got real drunk around him, and like that was a real struggle for me. And like I remember one day, like I ran into her room and I took the alcohol and I poured it out in the sink, and he was like, you know, you owe me $14. So he was that dude, you know what I mean? He was that dude, and yeah, you know, it's just that whole situation. I mean, I think the two-family household was like a staple of the 80s and 90s. Like anybody who's in their 30s or 40s or maybe like 50s now remembers that. It wasn't you, it was like your best friend or whatever.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I could, you know, like the brutality of high school was brutal. Like it was like physically, at least in my life, it was physically brutal. Like I remember I was at a hot dog place, and you know, like this white dude, he was just sitting down eating his hot dog, and this black dude named Jamal. And Jamal's like a big dude, and he's like, "Hey, you want to see me? You want to slap this white dude?" Like there's no reason. Like he was just eating his hot dog. You know what I mean? And Jamal just walked up to him and was just like, and it was heavy. Like, you know, he had a big, heavy arm. And that part, he was so confused. Like he didn't understand. He was like more than anything, he was confused. Like he was like, if he should be, he was just sitting there eating his hot dog. He didn't say anything, he didn't do anything, you know. And like that was normal. That's what's crazy. That wasn't even abnormal. Like, you know, kind of like what he was talking, like that was normal behavior in high school. And that's
That we need that, but I definitely think these kids need to be a little bit more like accountable. Like nobody gets off at the wrong bus stop and punches anybody in the mouth anymore. So kids just talk hella shit all the time. I'm just saying. Sorry, I didn't cut you off.
no, it's all good. It's all good. So, you know, I mean, I definitely feel him on that whole situation. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'll stop there and pass if anybody else wants to jump in.
Let me say this, that when I was a kid, I was in third grade, and during recess, you know, me and my friend, we went downtown. It was only about 4 blocks away. And he walked into the store, and he took some candies and put it in his pocket. And just as we was going out, we got picked up by the store manager. And so I was accused of stealing something that I never stole, you know. So they called my stepfather, and he came down to the store, man. He felt that he was embarrassed because he was coming to pick me up, and I was stealing. And I tried to explain to him that I didn't steal, that the other kid did, you know. But we was in recess, we had to go back to the class, and he said, "Well, what you doing out of class?" And I said, "Well, you know, we was in recess, and my man decided, you know, my friend decided to take me to the store because he wanted to buy something, but I didn't know he was going to steal. But my stepfather didn't believe me, you know, because I did so much shit in my life, man, when I was a kid. So he didn't believe me. So you know what he did? He took out his belt, and he started hitting me with a belt. And from the store to about 5 blocks away where I lived, he was constantly hitting me, you know. And I remember that, you know, because after all, I was innocent, you know. I didn't have nothing to do with it. And then later on, funny thing is that later on, he found out that it wasn't me. But, you know, like he was my stepfather and he wasn't my father. I never met my father. I grew up with stepfathers. So he never apologized to me. I felt that he needed an apology. I needed an apology, but he never apologized. I guess because he was he was so-called my father, stepfather, of course. He had the authority to do whatever he felt doing. Crazy. That's why sometimes you can't and it's funny that I said that story because there was I'm a retired social worker. I used to be a social worker. I used to work with people who had HIV and people who are addicts. So I worked with that population for many years. But I said that to say this, that I used to, some of my clients, I used to take them to my house, especially the HIVs. I used to take them to my house and give them some food because they didn't have no food, Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, so first off, I want to say I feel you on being with the homie that does the shady stuff that you didn't know that they were planning on doing, and then you catch the butt whooping because of that, which is whack. I'm still holding that against people. At 43, I'm holding that against people. But yeah, Sister Anna, Lobo, either you two want to weigh in on this?
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay, we're
I'm good. I'm good.
okay. Anybody else want to volunteer to read?
Well, I'll read it if nobody right now does it. I'll do the reading.
Yes, sir.
Okay. After that incident in the cafeteria, everyone on my side of town was talking about how I had fucked up JR. It was like I had instantly turned into a 71st Street celebrity overnight. I was hearing that a lot of people who were in the lunchroom that day even kept pieces of that shattered lunch tray as souvenirs. I thought I was wild. People I had never met before would occasionally come up to me in the store and ask me if I was the guy who had hit JR in the head with a lunch tray. I don't know how they knew who I was because this was long before Facebook and Instagram, but I welcomed and embarrassed and embraced my new image. I honestly didn't expect the reaction of my classmates and peers. I just wanted to make an example out of JR. I figured doing so as dramatically as I did would let motherfuckers know that if anyone tried me, friends, where is that? Everyone tried me, friends, all foes alike, I will respond in the most extreme way. Nevertheless, the widespread reaction I received from that altercation made me realize that you could establish a reputation practically overnight by doing something extreme, way, in the most extreme way, right? Nevertheless, the widespread reaction I received from that altercation made me realize that you could establish a reputation practically overnight by doing something extreme and bored in front of a lot of eyewitnesses. It was akin to the shock and awe strategy that George W. Bush will employ in 2003 to initiate the second Iraq war. I would turn to this strategy often throughout my life to quickly establish a reputation that would precede me while gaining the respect of my peers and becoming a deterrent to my enemies. Since Pike had expelled me from school for the entire year, I started to work and be at home more often. That started to create a lot of tension between me, my dad, and stepmother. She seemed to always have a problem with something. Instead of telling me herself, she would make my dad be the bearer of my bad news, which in turn will create more tension between he and I. I remember one time he came all the way up to my job. Where is it? Where did I go?
Right here.
Up to my job just to remind me to lock the top lock of the back door because that's how she wanted it whenever I left out the house. You came all the way up here to tell me that shit, even though the bottom lock was obviously locked. You felt the need to come up here to convey that shit to me. She knew what she was doing and it was working. My relationship with my father began to spiral downward. It came to a head one evening when he came and picked me up from a friend's house who I had spent the night over to take me back to my mom's house. I had only been living with my father for a few months, but I felt unwelcome there. For most of my life, I had pieced my father on a pedestal I often had gotten into with my parents for taking me up for him or wanting to live with him. To feel unwelcome in this household made me lose all respect for him. That day, the pendulum swung up the opposite extreme. I hated my father and didn't care if I ever saw him another day in my life. While he was in his room getting ready to take me back to my mom's house, I slipped out of the house. Before I left, I picked up one of the decorative stones in the yard and busted out the headlights of my father's car. I had never destroyed someone's property to make a statement, but I did that day. After I heard his headlights shattered, I took off into the night. I didn't want to go back to my mom's house. I had ran away from my mom's house once before, but came back that night. This time I knew I wasn't welcome there, even if I wanted to go back home, which I didn't. I decided to head to my grandfather's and Uncle Bobby's house. They stayed across the street from my old grade, what is that? Where I left at? Old grade school 42. It was late at night and their house was at least a few hours away on foot. Highway there I came across a park that had parked benches scattered throughout it. I found one and took a nap on it. In the morning, I got up and continued until I reached Pow's house. Oh boy.
Lobo or Sister Anna, one of you two want to pick up?
Yeah, I got it. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not too sure why my camera's not working, but okay. I was glad he was home when I knocked on the door. For most of that day, I just sat around watching old westerns with him. I never understood how a black person could side with cowboys over the quote unquote Indians, but he would. I wasn't fond of watching westerns, but anytime I did, I was always glad to see the Indians ambush the white man. That's that's why when I learned about Geronimo, I took a strong liking to him. I figured all quote unquote Indians should be like Geronimo, except the part of his life when they had domesticated him and he stopped resisting. The next couple of weeks went by in a haze for me. I found myself at a few different houses. I stayed at my Aunt Susie's house for a few days, then my grandmother's, and lastly my cousin's. I really didn't have any sense of direction and focus around this time. I enjoyed staying with my cousin, Chanel, because we had practically grown up together. Out of all my female cousins, she was my favorite at the time of my life. but she was at a place in her own life where she was making bad choices herself. She loved street niggas. Around this time, she was messing with a stick up man by the name of Killer Rob. He had recently broken out of the county jail and was on the run. I heard a lot of stories about him from my cousins. He was known for being a goon in the streets who robbed some of the biggest drug dealers in the streets. I don't know where I was coming back from, but when I got home on this particular day, this guy was leaving out. He had put his Glock 40 in his waistband before leaving with a duffel bag. After he left, my cousin started giggling and said, "You know who that was?" "Nah, that was Killer Rob." No shit. I couldn't believe it. I had heard so much about this dude that I thought I never would have ever have come across him in person. He was a notorious street legend. That was the first time I had ever met him in person. He certainly looked like I had imagined him to be, on swole, dark skin, with a rough demeanor. Instead of being fearful of someone like him, I began admiring all the street cats in the city like him. Years later, I would come across him a few times in the county jail and would chop it up with him. I felt validated for someone like him to know me by face after our first encounter. One thing was perplexing about guys like him was the fact of how lucky they were. It seemed like they would catch a case and you would think that they would be sent away forever, but somehow they would be right back on the streets, off into the same shit. It seemed like the wildest dudes had the best luck when it came to the courts. Some would catch murders after murders and beat murder after murder cases. I never heard of him snitching on anyone. He was just one of the lucky ones who seemed to wiggle out of trouble before finding himself back into trouble with the law again. Years later, when I had just started my prison bit at Wabash, I heard that Killer Rob's luck ran out on him. Uh-oh. Some young guy who wasn't determined by his reputation gunned him down. That happened to so many of the street legends in Indianapolis. Anytime I would hear about how the story ended for guys like him, it would make me reflect on my own life.
All right. I want to take a quick break, check in. Any comments or reflections on that section?
Yo, I got something to say about Geronimo if I can.
Yeah, go ahead, bro.
Interesting story. So, if you look at a lot of like the Chicano movement and brown berets and so forth, you know, thanks be to the creator and the ancestors, a lot of them are just now decolonizing and understanding that we are, Native American, just like our Boricua and Puerto Rican brothers and sisters, and being Taino, a lot of the Mexican and Chicano people were Mexica, which the Aztecs, uh, that's what the Spanish conquistadors called the Aztecs, is Mexica, right? What's interesting is many moons ago, I worked in New Mexico and I worked at a hospital that was ran by the VA. So it was like on the federal level, I was working with cats that were like Navajo code talkers. A lot of deported veterans, believe it or not, there would be Mexicans that would sign up and get shipped off to war and then were deported and they would sneak back into the US and then seek VA services, which is a wild story. And so I worked with a lot of these cats, and I'll never forget um, one of the Navajo code talkers. We were talking about Native American veterans, and how could it be that you could fight for this country after what the country did to the Native Americans and so forth. And then we started talking about Cochise, Sitting Bull, and Geronimo came up, and this old man set me in my place, and it was the most uh awe experience I've ever had because it was very humbling. So he told me, he said, "So you're Mexican, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm half Chicano. My dad's from Venezuela, my mom's Chicana from Texas." He goes, "Okay." And he goes, "Well, you know why his name is Geronimo, right?" And I said, "Nah, why?" He goes, "Well, that's what your people gave him." And I was like, well, what you talking about? My people. And he goes, his name ain't Geronimo. He said, he's not Spanish. He's not Mexican. His name is Goyathale or something. That's like a native indigenous name. And it means he who yawns. And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow.
And he goes, well, you know why your people gave him the name Geronimo, right? And I was like, nah. And I was trying not to get mad because he kept saying your people. And he was like, well, you know, the Mexican federales, they hated us Indians and they hunted him down. They couldn't capture him. So they raped and killed his wife and daughters. And I was just, and
Wow.
he's telling me this at work in front of everybody. And I'm just like, yo, really? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, and the reason why his name is Geronimo is as he hunted down every single Mexican federale, they were praying to their white Catholic God and their saint,
Oh,
Santo Geronimo, to save them as he was scalping them alive. And then this little man just turned around and
oh
walked
my,
away. I was like, damn.
oh my goodness.
That is how I got decolonized and learned about the real Geronimo. And he, in a straight face, he just told me like that and walked away. And I was like, yes, sir. Copy that. All right.
Thank you.
Drop, son.
History that they don't even teach us in school once again.
The things we learn from the elders, let me tell you. And I think Brother Jorge wants to say something.
Yeah, what I'm about to say, I hope it never happens to y'all. About 40, almost 40 years ago, I was hanging out with my cousin, and we decided to go to Jersey because we were looking for some girls to have fun with. So we snuck on the train and went to Jersey and all that. And so he said, well, I got to call the people up to see, man, if there's going to be any girls at our house. I said, okay, you go ahead and do it. So he took a phone and he put a quarter in. And for some reason, the phone didn't respond the way he wanted to respond. So he started banging on it. At that moment, after he was banging on it for about 5 minutes, the police came and got out the car and came over to us and said, what you doing? So he told them what was happening, that the phone refused to give him back his money. And so will you believe it? They arrested both of us for robbing the New York telephone company.
Oh man.
That was ridiculous. I said, what, you gonna arrest me? I had nothing to do with this. He said, yeah, but you know, they wanted me to turn on my cousin, and I wasn't gonna turn on my cousin. So I said, yeah, okay, hell with it, man. So we both went to Bergen County Jail, and I stood there for about 3.5 weeks. So when we went back to court, the judge said he was gonna hold me because there was a man named George Nieves who was wanted for murder. That was my name. It wasn't me. It was somebody else with my name. I said, oh God. So I waited another 2 weeks. And when I went back to court, the judge said, oh, I'm sorry, I let you go. I've got to release you because the person who has your name, we already got him. And we sorry, man, that I'm sorry that we kept you in jail so long. I said, okay. So I went back they sent me back to Bergen County Jail, and they wouldn't even give me no money to take a bus back to Brooklyn. So I had to walk to the freeway. I had to walk like close to 40 miles, you know, and it was dark. It was dark. And I'm walking, but the thing is, I was walking at the edge of the highway because there was cars zooming. I said, oh God. So by the time I got to the Brooklyn, to the bridge, I was so happy. I crossed the bridge, went downstairs, jumped over the turnstile and took the train, went home.
Oh wow.
But it just the mere fact of being with somebody and they commit, quote unquote, a crime, and because you don't turn against them, they put you in jail too.
That's crazy. That is crazy. But that walking, I don't know if you was in New York City when we had that big major blackout and that
Yes.
lasted for I had
Yeah.
to walk. I had to
Yep.
walk all the way from uptown, Harlem, East Harlem, all the way down to Brooklyn,
Oh,
where
God.
back and forth because we had to, take our region test, and I ended up burning a hole in my shoe.
Oh,
And then
gee.
I had to walk up 13 flights of stairs because during the summertime, the elevators were broken.
Yeah.
So
That
I
was,
was qualifying for the Olympics.
I think that was 77 that had the blackout, right?
Yes,
77?
yes, it did.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I was,
Well,
I was living with this young lady at that time, and she won't let me out the house because she felt that if I went out, I was gonna go raid some store, and because I was seeing people, man, walking down the street with television, boom boxes. And I said, "Oh God, I'm gonna get me some," but she won't let me in. She won't let me out. She used to stand in
Well,
front of her. You ain't
I,
going
I
nowhere.
got I gotta
I
say,
said, God, man.
Elder Jorge, your whole theme tonight is from like no matter what age, you seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people.
That's right. That's right. You got that. You got that right.
You know what I mean? So there's two things I wanted to that kind of hit me. So I love my sister. I don't want to put her on blast, but my sister definitely had some Chanel. I mean, I think I had mentioned my nephew, who passed. He got hit by a train in 2013. Yeah, so his dad actually got killed when my sister was pregnant with him, and he was 20 at the time. Got shot with a shotgun at point blank range in East Oakland. They did the funeral closed casket, had no face, and
oh man.
yeah, it was bad. And I don't think she ever, like, it never affected, like, it never changed the type of men she went after. Like, she may still be, I don't know, we don't really talk as much as we used to, but as I definitely, that was a big part of my teenage life, was my sister's dudes. Like, some of them, I was 15, two of them they moved in. Like, it was, anyway, so it's that. And then yeah, so the luck of the wildest dudes. I feel that, man. I'm not gonna name names because I want to dry snitch or whatever, but I had this one homie, and he was so, like, he has a story about how, like, he was gonna rob a liquor store, and so his plan was to get on top of the roof of the liquor store and then jump down, like, to the door and then come in. And so he got to the roof of the liquor store, and there was somebody else up there also planning on robbing the liquor store at the same time. So they ended up robbing the liquor store together as a team. And, like, this dude had a million of those stories, but somehow had a million of those stories. Like, and I would run into him, like, just on, I mean, he just seemed to be able to get away with everything all the time. And, I mean, it's, I also have friends, I might count myself in this group, and maybe Elder Jorge, who, like, not only can't get away with anything, but get in trouble for stuff that they didn't even do. You know what I mean? It's like the total opposite end of the spectrum. So, I definitely felt both of those things. But anyway, pass.
Okay. If you want, I could go ahead and read, but honestly, I was multitasking. So, exactly where are y'all?
Right.
Where are we?
Since I had been expelled, it's page.
Yeah, I got 103.
Okay,
But
work.
is it since I had,
Yeah,
or
since
I
I
don't
had.
think?
That's exactly what it is. Since I had.
Okay. Since I have been expelling, no high school in Indianapolis would have transferred me there, along with the fact that my living situation wasn't stable. My mom reached out to my uncle Ricky and asked him if I would stay with him until my sophomore year ended. He accepted, and I moved to Warrensburg, Missouri to stay with him. I don't think I have been there a whole, I'm sorry, let me turn my video on. I don't think I had been there a whole 2 weeks before almost getting arrested for shoplifting. This particular day, we went to the Walmart in town to get something, and I told my uncle that I wanted to check out something real quick. I just wanted to get away from him so I could steal some CO2 cartridge. The week before, my mom and grandfather had driven back to Nap, we had gone to the same Walmart where I had shoplifted a pellet gun. I had stolen the gun and several boxes of pellets, but I didn't realize that the gun needed CO2 cartridge in order for it to work. The whole summer, I had gotten used to stealing stuff out of the store all the time. I was really becoming a true kleptomaniac. If I wasn't shoplifting, I was going through unlocked cars, stealing whatever I could find. That was around the time that beepers were out on the black market. You could steal someone beeper, then turn around and sell it real quick. I'm surprised there was a Walmart back then, because I know up north they would have burned them to the doggone ground. But on the next page, it say, my uncle Ricky was shitty and embarrassment when the security personnel pulled us out of line. He was vouching for me and everything. When they took us back to the security room, it took a while for the security guy to find the hidden compartment in my winter coat. For a minute, I thought I was going to get away with it until he started shaking my jacket. After he did that, it was over. The metallic clinking sound of the CO2 cartridge gave it away. They didn't arrest me, but they did ban me from going to that Walmart again. There was only one Walmart in the whole town of Warrensburg, Missouri, too. In fact, in this country cottage town, Walmart was the mall to these people. Literally, guys after school would go to Walmart just to hang out. I hated that country. I thought it said county. Since my uncle was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force, it really embarrassed him. He told me how bad that would, I'm sorry, lighting's so bad here, that wouldn't have made him look if that had gotten back to his superiors. I figured he was going to whoop my ass when he got back to the house. Instead, he made me do 500 push-ups. Oh my God, 500 jumping jacks and 500 sit-ups. I was so tired after that, wanted to run away back to Indianapolis, but I knew I would never make it back on foot. If I tried, so I endured and stopped stealing while I lived there with him. Warrensburg High School was a very different from what I was accustomed to. There were Black kids there, mostly ones whose parents were in the military, but they were Black kids that have been greatly influenced by the white country culture we were surrounded by. All the black dudes had white girlfriends, and everyone said, dude, all the time, like white kids. After a while, it rubbed off on me, and I was even startled saying dude at the woman all the time myself. It actually took it a while to shake that word from my vernacular. When I eventually went back to Nat, I think one of the craziest things that I experienced at the school was the time we were marshaled into the room one up by one and asked to open our mouths so they could see our gums. I figured they was checking the dope bag hidden in our mouths or something. When someone finally told me what they were really checking for, I laughed hysterically. They was checking for chewing tobacco. I had wondered why that school, what is the carpet have brown spot scattered throughout. That's why. Not too long after I had arrived, I was allowed to join the junior varsity basketball team. I didn't try out or anything. The only problem was my transcripts and paperwork from my other high school was lagged behind. So I had to sit on the bench till I was officially eligible to play. I hated that. To my surprise, Williamsburg varsity team were actually good. They had quite a few Black kids whose parents were in the military who attended the high school. Many of them had skills and made up their rosters. I think I played one game before quitting. I just couldn't adjust to how a lot of the white coaches wanted me to play. I felt my confidence slipping away. My Uncle Ricky was angry that I had quit. I was like the only son before he actually had a number of years later. I think he believed in the more than I believed in myself. Like I said, my confidence had begun to suffer since middle school. After I had quit the junior varsity team, I started to hang out at the college campus, not too far from my house every day after school. If it wasn't for the University of Central Missouri being close to our residence, I think I would have lost my mind. There was nothing really to do living in the country. We had to travel in an hour just to reach a mall in Kansas City. The college gave me a chance to experience campus life a little bit, playing pick-up games with the college kids, strengthened my game. Occasionally, even the guys who played for the college would play pickup games. That's how I met the university point guard, Tyrone Latimer, who became the 5th all-time leading scorer to the school. We all called him Ty. He quickly took a liking to me. Not only was he down to earth and would sometimes give me free tickets to his home games, but I learned a lot from him on the court. He had the coolest crossover I had ever seen. Anyone empty in his person? Anyone exploit in his person. I'm sorry. I stopped mimicking his crossover with great effect. I figured when I returned to my high school, my junior year, I would have an offensive weapon that was destined to help me achieve greatness as well. I don't think I waited even a week after my sophomore year ended to return to NAP. I couldn't wait to get back to the city. After living in a rural country for 7 months, I swore I would never live in a town ever again in my life. I was definitely a city boy. That summer, my guy, Brandon, BC, Greg, and I became super tight. I had history with Brandon and BC since middle school and hung out with them off and on. Gray had recently moved to Indianapolis. He was a military kid himself, so he would transfer to different states with my father, stepmother, and sister occasionally. He and I became real close going to my junior year. Since none of us had cars on our own except Gray, we would often mob out in his car together. That summer, I started working at Shoney's restaurant near 86 and Michigan Road. Even though I would work, I would start shoplifting again, which led to me catching my second arrest as a juvenile. We had all planned it on attending the Soul Fest that year. The Soul Fest was a culture event they held in Washington Park every June. I'm not sure why I felt the need to shoplift this particular day since I had $500 in my pocket, but I did. I'm still embarrassed to mention the store that we went into for me to shoplift, but I separated from the group and went into the store and one of their shopping bags. I probably put about 5 shirts into my bag before I started walking towards the exit when I was apprehended and taken to the security room. The security guard showed the video camera of me stealing the shirts I had placed into the bag. He said he was going to call my parents and have them come and pick me up. I just wouldn't be able to frequent that store anymore. When I moved back to Nap, I went back to stay at my mom and stepfather's house, but I knew they were out of town that weekend. He told me if he wouldn't reach them, he was going to have to send me to juvenile. As soon as he turned his back for a split second, I darted out of that security room and headed for the exit. Like the super the super cop he was, to tell you the light is bad here. He chased me out the store and stayed about 50 yards behind me until I hopped a fence and expanded the distance between us. After I jumped that wooden fence, I ran through this car junkyard area and then ran through a small wooden area before coming to this white garage. I was so tired that I figured I would hide in that garage and hoped he kept running. Instead of that happening, he searched the garage, and that's when I took off running again. By that time, I was dead tired, and he had gotten a hold of me. Once he wrestled me to the ground, he slapped the handcuffs on me and took me back to the store. I'm sorry, I'm reading from the book, y'all. I sat on the sidewalk in front of the store for about 20 minutes. At one point, I watched BC and Gray come out of the store and locked eyes with me. All they could do was shake their heads. I felt real stupid when this older Black woman looked at me when she came out the store and said, "That's a shame. I swore to myself that day that I would never shoplift in my life again." After the paddy wagon came and picked me up, They passed through the Marion County Jail. I'm sorry, that's my alarm. County Jail to drop off a few adults that they had picked up. By the time I reached the juvenile center, a few hours had passed. I went through the normal processing routine and was placed back into the holding cell with the other juveniles. I sat for about 6 hours in the processing area before they told me that they would be holding me for the weekend until they could get a hold of my parents. Everyone being held over had to take a shower and have this special spray sprayed into the ear and on that public pubic area. They said it was to kill any lice. I was then taken to intake and placed in an individual cell. I don't think they placed me on dole this time. If you were placed on dole status, that meant that you had to stay in your cell for 72 hours before you could be placed around for the other juveniles. If I'm not mistaken, we came out to eat together and everything. This particular time, I remember bumping into Little Will. I haven't seen him since our school 42 days, since he was always getting locked up. Like I said, Little Will was the only kid I came across who I knew was destined for prison when we were in kindergarten together. It was cool to chop it up with him. Anytime he told you a story, he would, I'm sorry, I can't read this. He could retell it and act it out and everything. Bro, he said with bright eyes, when the police got behind the stolen car, I paled it off on his ass. Shit, I jumped out of the car as soon as I thought I had lost him. He went on to explain how they eventually caught up with him and roughed him up. He kept me amused the weekend. I was there with him. I'm not sure if they sent him away to the boys' school for that or not. The next time I will run into him will be when I caught my blank robbery case. Luckily for me, the judge just put me on probation for about 6 months and let me back out. You want me to continue on? Okay.
I'm gonna jump in here. And thank you, Sister Anna. When my junior year started and November rolled around, I tried out for the junior varsity team and made it. I knew this year would be a pivotal year for me. It was a make or break season. If I didn't make a name for myself, I knew I would be getting cut my senior year. It wasn't long into the season before I realized that my hoop dreams were coming into an end. The first game that the coach benched me for not coming to one practice that he said I could have off. At least that was my understanding. I hurt my shoulder during practice one day. Instead of going to practice the next day, I went home after school. The next day at practice, he asked me why I didn't show up the day before. That's when I realized that he still wanted me to come. I just would be watching from the sidelines. Nonetheless, I took it personal when he benched me our first game. It was around this time that I first started smoking weed, but eventually led to me selling weed. My guy BC ended up quitting the basketball team soon after me. After school, me, him, and Greg started hanging out, getting high all the time. Anytime there was a party at one of the under 21 clubs, we were there. Most of the time, I would walk over to BC's neighborhood and kick it with him over this white chick's house. That was the first time I came across a parent who allowed kids to smoke weed in their presence. We took advantage of that. That became one of the hangout spots. I remember one time we were over there and this brother I refer to as G was supposed to fight this white dude over something. We were instigating G to beat his ass, but he was acting scared and reluctant. What happened next caught all of us by surprise. Out of nowhere, this other brother named John picked G up off the ground and slammed him hard to the ground and began beating the shit out of him. We all watched, shocked but amused. After he got done whooping him, he said, "You ain't no gangster. I don't ever want to hear you claim GD ever again in your life." I knew John was GD because we claimed GD too. But I realized how serious he took that shit compared to us. For me, I just claimed it because everyone in my neighborhood who I fuck with was claimed GD. Besides, I like the color blue. But ideologically, I wasn't into gang life like that. Since I wasn't always into shit and willing to fight, I figured I was just, the thing to do. I didn't know any lit for any long time and really didn't have any knowledge about gang history. I was a kid who was in search for an identity and wanted to be accepted by my peers. Nothing more, nothing less. I really realized that gang life wasn't for me when another GD friend of mine suggested that we go down to this Vice Lord neighborhood on 71st Street and shoot it up. He wanted to kill every Vice Lord we could catch slipping. That just seemed like the most ignorant shit I'd ever heard. I couldn't see myself killing other black people because of a color or what they claimed. I knew dudes who were into gangbanging, but I wasn't sold on taking shit that far. It was just the thing to do to me. I didn't mind jumping motherfuckers or shit like that, but killing someone over it, especially Vice Lords who grew up with, hell nah. After that, I stopped claiming that. That summer, Greg informed us that he and his family were moving to Virginia. I think that caught us all off guard. He was like my blood brother. Our little clique was tight. Due to the news, we all spent as much time as we could with each other. After he left, it caused me and BC to become even tighter. Anytime we smoked a blunt from that day forth, we gave a shout out to Greg. By my senior year, I was nickeling and diming in the weed game. To be honest, I was only hustling to support my own habit. I really didn't have any ambitions to do it much bigger. Maybe a little spending money on the side, but nothing major. That's why when I ran into a friend who I refer to as T-Man at the Circle City Classic that October, he told me that I would sell quarter ounces of weed for only $200 that he would sell. So I jumped on that opportunity. I figured if I disciplined myself, I could move up to a half ounce and a pound in no time. And that way I could support my habit and make a little on the side. And if that worked out, maybe try to handle some real weight and time. Like I said, I wasn't in it mostly for the money. I had a growing habit that I was trying to maintain. Besides, I was one of those types of friends who would smoke with you anytime I fired up a blunt and you were around. You could guarantee to smoke with me for free. The day that T-Man came and picked me up from the crib, I had an uneasy feeling about the transaction. Instead of letting me see the weed immediately, he and his two friends he was in the car with pulled off. He then fired up a blunt and handed it to me. At first, we were supposed to park in my neighborhood somewhere until he decided against that. He just seemed too on edge for me. Instead of trusting my instincts, though, I went along for the ride. As he and the guy up front talked, I asked the guy in the back seat with me if I could see the weed. He handed me a bag. When I looked into the bag, I saw that it was wrapped in aluminum foil. My heart skipped a beat. My intuition kicked in. This hoe-ass nigga is about to try and rob me. Over $200. What type of petty-ass shit is this? I tried to look and see what was in the foil without anyone seeing. I knew T-Man wasn't aware that he had given me the brown bag. So when I saw a hint that it was a sock wrapped in foil, I hurried up and closed the bag and tried to think quick. I took the $200 out of my main pocket and slipped it into the little pocket above it inconspicuously. Man, ride over to Wildwood real quick so I can pick up that money for you, I said, not letting on that I knew it was a setup. Shit, you don't have the money? T-Man said, surprised. No, I was gonna grab it from my guy to pay you. I'm not sure what he did next, but this motherfucker pulled a mask over his face and turned around. I thought to myself, this motherfucker watches too many movies. If he doesn't kill me, I'm gonna kill his ass first for this petty larceny ass shit. You know what time it is? Where's the money, motherfucker? Shit, I told you, it's over my guy's house. He started going through my pockets, but they were empty. When he saw the beeper on my waist, he snatched that off me. Thinking quick, I reached for the door and opened it. I was gonna jump out, but he closed it. Hey, nigga, speed up. This motherfucker's trying to jump out the car. The driver sped up to about 55 or 60 miles per hour, but that didn't deter me. I was fearful of one of them shooting me, so I reached for the door and opened. This time I bailed out. I felt the back tire roll over my leg, but didn't break it. I think since it was going so fast, the weight of the car just passed over it without creating further injuries. No sooner than I had hit the ground, I was up and running. Instead of coming back to chase me, they kept going. The first payphone I came to, I hurried up and called a friend of mine. I told him what happened and he came and picked me up. My right leg was bleeding from where I jumped and hit the pavement. As soon as I left his house, I went and bought myself a 9mm pistol. I was intending to kill T-Man. I went over to another friend's house and told him what had happened. His cousin from Gary, Indiana was there. To my surprise, they told me they would take me to this neighborhood. I jumped on the offer. It definitely wasn't in my right mind. I had never been robbed before in my life. I just wanted revenge. So I jumped in the car and headed out with him. I didn't exactly know where T-Man lived or in the general area where he hung out, so I pointed the way. After we got a few blocks from my guy's house, his cousins pulled over at a gas station and asked me to give him my gun. They said they had a spot for it just in case the police pulled us over. I hesitated, but eventually relented. As soon as I handed the one passenger in my passenger seat my gun, he pointed the gun at me. Get out the car, little nigga. I couldn't believe it. I had been robbed twice in the same day. This time, it was definitely my fault. Ain't no way in hell I should have trusted anyone in a situation like that. Even if they were going to take me to his neighborhood. They would be witnesses that could snitch on me later. I felt so defeated when I opened the door and got out. For the next few weeks, I started to think of how I was going to get T-Man and those Gary niggas back. I didn't want to kill their cousin because I didn't think they had anything to do with them taking my gun. I had never been to Gary and damn sure didn't want to chance it by going and looking for them in their own city. Instead, I chalked it up and decided to just aim my sights at T-Man. So I bought a .380 and waited for Halloween. Figured that day would be perfect, a perfect opportunity to kill someone with a mask on. When Halloween rolled around, I left out the house that night expecting to commit my first murder. I looked up the phone number on my caller ID to get the exact location of where his mom stayed. I looked and looked, but couldn't find his address for shit. The numbers I came across in the neighborhood I searched through were close, but seemed to stop and never continue. After a few hours, I gave up looking and went home distraught. Years later, I realized that she stayed in an apartment complex not too far from where I had searched. Sometimes when I think back to that day, I'm glad I never found their house. It's a good possibility that I would have been in prison for the rest of my life. I say that because I might have killed him and his mama. I never understood why people would do dirt to people who could take it out on their family. I never imagined killing anyone, let alone their family. You don't know what you're capable of until you find yourself in that situation with an entirely different mind frame. The streets are unforgiving and ruthless. I'm just glad that I don't have to live with the knowledge today that I had killed someone. T-Man and I never crossed paths again. It wouldn't be until 20 years later that he and I would finally speak. A mutual friend of ours had died, which had given us the opportunity to officially bury the hatchet and let the past stay in the past. He sincerely apologized for what he had done, and I accepted it since we had both matured a lot and were nothing like what we used to be. After his robbery attempt, however, at the time, he changed how I carried myself dramatically. From that day on, I carried a pistol all the time, especially when conducting any business, no matter big or small. I vowed to myself that I would never get caught slipping ever again. Volunteer?
Okay, I'll go ahead. Unless someone else want to go, I can't see the hands. All right. While I sold small quantity of weeds and packed pistols after school, I still went to school every day and was a good student academically. Throughout most of my years in high school, I kept A's, B's, C's on my report card. You can say that I lived a double life. If you asked 100 people who were a part of different facets in my life what type of person I was, you will probably get back 100 different responses. But I think most would say that I was a smart kid who had a bright future ahead of me. I don't think many would say that I was.
Hello? So, sister, you're on mute. Unmute yourself. So, sister, you gotta unmute yourself. Right? Okay, yeah. You there?
I was gonna say, I think she might have glitched out.
Yeah.
I can take over where she was at.
Okay, good.
Okay, I was a bright kid who had a bright future ahead of me. I don't think many would say that I was a problem child who was destined for prison. I kept this other life more hidden from most people in my life. The hardest part was keeping my anger and propensity for violence hidden. I saw everything in white then. If you crossed me or committed a perceived injustice against me, I felt duty bound to do something about it. The first part of my senior year, I had a few run-ins with teachers and school officials. I don't remember all the grievances I had around this time, but I remember getting fed up with what I perceived as arbitrary authority. It seems like people who had positions of authority over me would always find ways to assert their authority over me unjustifiably. And I hated that. It wasn't about what was right or wrong or if the policies and regulations were being followed to these types of people. It was more so whatever they said went. That type of shit would get under my skin. I would see a lot of people my age and even adults in general allow people in positions of power to use it against them. But I was feeling very opposed to just going along with any program. It didn't matter if a person was a teacher, the school principal, a police officer, or the president of the United States. I felt that if you were clearly wrong about something, you should be held accountable no matter who you were or how high your position was. It's when people feel powerless and feel like there's no appropriate avenues to get their grievances addressed that they begin taking matters into their own hands. And that's what happened to this particular day at school that I'm going to share. Did she come back? Do you want to start over? Do you see where I am?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, you go ahead. I'm trying to catch up now.
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
All right, it says, I remember getting off the school bus this particular morning and walking into the school building. This teacher named John Marshall was standing in the hallway and telling people to remove the chewing gum from their mouths and throw it away like he did every morning. I'm not gonna lie. Although I understood why they didn't want people chewing gum in school because they stick their gum to chairs or desks or other places instead of the trash, I felt it was a rule they could never truly enforce. No matter how often they would try to police the student body from chewing gum in the building, we would still do it. If we were caught, they would simply ask us to throw our gum away. but it was a ridiculous rule to me. Most teachers really didn't care and wouldn't say anything to you about it. This Mr. Marshall guy was a stickler for enforcing this rule. It gave him power to fuck with you, and I hated it. Every morning we would come into the building. He was right near the door, making people spit out their gum. He would literally go from one person to the next about that shit. They normally wouldn't give him any problems behind it. They would simply spit it out and then put another piece in their mouths when they were out of his sight. Like I said, it was a ridiculous rule that was an unwinnable war. I personally got tired of witnessing this charade play out every morning and no one giving him any pushback behind it. So when I walked in the building that morning and saw him harassing people over it, I started acting like I had gum in my mouth. I wanted him to say something to me, so I started acting like I was chewing my gum with exaggerated gyrations. I even made sure I walked in his direction so he couldn't miss me. When his eyes locked on me, I was prepared to make him out to be a fool for being the gum police. I wanted to make him look stupid. Instead of focusing on real contraband, he wanted to harass us over some motherfucking gum every morning. Sir, he said, looking in my direction, I'm gonna need you to spit that gum out. I acted like I didn't hear him and kept chewing and smacking loudly. Sir, I need you to dispose of your gum now. Looking at him, still chewing, I laughed and said, man, I don't have any gum in my mouth. Every morning you want to harass us over some gum. People are gonna chew gum throughout the day no matter what you do. Come here. By this time, everyone walking in the building was laughing. This was the first time someone had voiced what they were all actually feeling themselves. We all talked about how stupid this shit was all the time, but no one had the courage to voice it. Well, I did. I wanted to make him feel so embarrassed that he would stop trying to be the quote unquote gum police. As I walked over to him, I opened my mouth wide and moved my tongue around so he could see that there was no gum in my mouth. What's your name? Man, like I told you, I don't have any gum, I said, opening my mouth and showing him again. You get a kick out of this, don't you? Harassing us over some gum. You're never going to stop people from chewing gum in school. You know that, right? After I made my point, I walked off. I knew he was completely embarrassed because by this time, everyone who was around was hysterically. A few times I heard people agree with me with short affirmations like, yep, or straight up. As I walked off, he yelled, come back here. What's your name? I turned around and flashed a smile, but kept going. I had grown accustomed to speaking my mind to people in power. If I felt something was irrational and no one's going to speak on it, you could count on me speaking up. It got me into trouble with some teachers because they viewed me as being combative and not respecting their authority. But what is education really? If you don't feel free to challenge established norms, that goes for petty rules and regulations of which are truly enforceable or the curriculum that they teach us. If students don't feel comfortable being critical of everything without being threatened with being written up, then schools are simply conformity institutions. And to a large extent, I feel they are. Even more so today than when I was coming up. It's like they're stripping individuality out of the environment and taking away students' voices around all things considered. It's like shut up and go along with the program. I was never one of those shut up and go along with the program type of people, though, and often would pay attention to the consequence for not conforming. Do you want to take over?
I'm sorry, okay, I can take over. Where are you?
I didn't think too much about the altercation.
Okay. I didn't think too much about the altercation with Mr. Marshall that morning until my third period of the day. Mind you, we only had 4 periods each day. So this was towards the end of the day. I think I was in home economic class when I was told that I had to go to the principal office. Even when I left school and headed to the principal office, I didn't think it was going to be a big thing at all. I figure at the most, they would give me after school detention. I'd have been given detention several times before for shit like this. So I didn't mind the consequences for my action. It came with the territory. I didn't expect for it to turn into what it did though. I don't remember this dean's name, but I figured since he was Black, he would be able to relate to me. That didn't happen. I might have been better off to have gotten a white dean, honestly. Well, Mr. Miller, he said, handing me the write-up that Mr. Marshall had written up on me. I talked to Mr. Marshall about what had transpired early this morning. He said that you had brushed up on him like if you was going to fight him. He said, what? I said with a look of disbelief in my face. I went on to explain what had actually happened. He sat listening to me, but I could tell he was taking his word over mine. Man, there were plenty of witnesses there that you can talk to that will tell you that he's lying. I ran off a list of several students that were present. He assured me that he would look into the matter and left the office. I sat in the lobby for about an hour until he came back. It was the last period of the day when he brought me back into the office. Well, after looking into this, I'm going to have to suspend you for 3 days. Man, you couldn't have spoken to anyone who was there because they would have told you that I haven't tried to fight that dude. I would tell by the look on his face that he hadn't talked to anyone. He was simply taking Mr. Marshall's word over mine. I couldn't believe they were actually going to suspend me over a lie. I was pissed and felt completely helpless. It wasn't just because he had lied on me. I was angry that this suspension would have made my grade point average go down. I had several important tests coming up. Around this time, I think I had all A's and B's in my classes. I was particularly proud of the A that I had earned in my zoology class. I was contemplating on going to school to be a veterinarian once I completed high school. Several of my friends had discussed enrolling into Vincennes University, which was a junior college in Southern Indiana. I figured getting suspended would F up the splendid academic year I was having. Man, I said, staring the dean straight into his eye. Take this how you want to, but if you suspend me without speaking to any of my witnesses, I'm gonna beat Mr. Marshall ass over this shit. I don't think he had ever had a student speak so boldly or matter-of-factly to him before. He looked at me shocked by my words, but held his ground. Well, you gotta do what you gotta do, Mr. Miller. I left his office and sat in the lobby area of the principal office and waited until the bell rang. As soon as it did, I darted out of the principal office and headed straight towards Mr. Marshall Band's room. Along the way, I told a few people that I was about to beat Mr. Marshall ass for lying on me. By that time I reached his classroom, there was a handful of people who marched into the band room, eager to see that I was going to do. I was so angry that there were no question in my mind of what I was about to do. I'd never been lied on by a teacher before and suspended behind it. For me, this was the ultimate demonstration of arbitrary authority. As soon as I approached him, I said, "So you're going to lie on me?" I really don't have much else to say, so I punched him square in the face with all my might and kept punching him. Every time I drew back to hit him again, I threw my whole body weight into my next punch. I normally would use both fists when assaulting someone, but this time I hit him with all right hand power blows. I think around the fourth or fifth time I punched him, I felt my pinky knuckle pushed back into my hand. I knew I had broken my hand. The pain shot through my body with intensity. I couldn't use the hand anymore if I wanted to. The last punch was all it took for him to fall. Luckily for him, though, a student, I believe by the name of Michael, caught me before he could hit the floor. As Mike helped him up, I could see that Mr. Marshall was in a daze. I think if he would have hit the floor, that would have knocked him completely out. I was really pissed that dude had caught him and was assisting him. I'm sure Mike regretted that day though, because he ended up getting knocked up over that incident as well. I'm not sure how much time he did in juvenile, but he sure paid for being a good Samaritan. I knew he haven't done anything but helped him. I think because he was Black, they just figured he had to have been my accomplice, but he wasn't. Knowing that I was going to be arrested eventually, I jumped on the school bus and took it home. No sooner than I had made it home, I left the house to go hide out at a friend's house in an apartment complex across from Georgetown Crossing. I stayed over there a few hours before my mom paged me on my beeper. She told me that the police had come to the house looking for me. She was hysterical. She pleaded with me to turn myself in. I told her to let them know that I would if they would let me go to the hospital first. My broken hand was killing me. They agreed to my conditions of surrender. After I came home and my mom took me to the hospital, she drove me down to the juvenile center where I turned myself in. That night, as I sat in the juvenile holding tank, I couldn't help but to think about what was in store for my future. The judge had already warned me that if I got locked up again, he would send me off to boys' school. There was no question in my mind that he was going to live up to his word. And that's conclude chapter 9.
All right. So we got about 13 minutes before the video ends. So any final comments or reflections in this last 10 or 15 minutes we have together?
Okay, my question is, as far as what qualify, I wouldn't say qualified, but what would have children to receive detention? And do you find that it's like some correct mechanism for those students who, I would say the administrators in school believe that that would keep those kids focused on school? Or do you think that there's some other alternative program, to avoid children just receiving detention that will lead into a domino of other issues along the way during their academic school year?
I think that's a very loaded question.
No.
Yeah, programs,
And I want to
yes,
come back.
huge, but like, I mean, SROs are a huge problem, especially with Black, brown, and disabled people or differently abled people. It like starts in middle school when you have police in your schools, so that disproportionately does affect those communities statistically. That's like the first thing that comes to mind, but it's also just like his just my story, his resistance to authority, like there has to be other options for kids. Like, I didn't that I had the ability to like learn that I choose to learn now because of the way that information was given to us. It was just like, read this and then recite back what I said to you kind of thing. Like there has to be different options for kids that learn differently and stuff like that. And I don't think that cops should be in school, but that's really all that I have to say about it.
Well, I just see this. It's a way of saying that kids is only being seen and not heard. Because if there's a child who act into fine, or a child who does something that's not structured or right or uniform or whatever, then I think it should be the responsibility of those educators or those people who have been trained to work in an education system to investigate or take it to a specialist to find out what the problem is. You know, it's not pacifying the situation or ignoring the matter for what it is. And I think it's something that we really need to look into, particularly what's taking place today, or what took place, especially in my area when a 6-year-old child as young and tender as that age has shot his teacher. And we got to look at all reason of circulating of how, for example, that child got his gun. While he had used the gun, was he able to speak to anybody about any kind of issues or problems that wasn't being heard, in which he was being seen to only stay in your place, do what you need to do, study, blah, 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 the whole ritual. So as far as detention is concerned, I don't find it's a correct mechanism to a form of a structure to keep a child aligned. But if anything, is one that say, if you don't obey our rule, you're going to be other repercussions where drastic measures will take place, where they don't have a voice, where they don't have the freedom to express what's on their mind, but to tell them you need to conform or we will punish you.
Yeah, I totally feel that, Sister Anna. And Melissa, you know, it was funny. So there's a phrase you use, resistance to authority. And I think about that story. I think about some of my own experience. I related to a lot of that. I was definitely that student that was kind of like a dual personality. I don't know if I had A's. Like I almost flunked out. I mean, I literally almost flunked out. But I also won best defense pretrial attorney in the state of California. So like, I rolled both sides of that fence. And so I mean, I didn't have a problem with authority. I had a problem with certain types of authority. And I kind of felt like and I mean, I don't think I got it right all the time, but I feel like at a gut level, I did have a sense that there were some people who gave a damn about us and there were some people who did not. And a lot of the times, the people who did not were administrators, and the people who did were teachers. Now, you know, there are also teachers who were kind of just doing their jobs or whatever, you know, just collecting a paycheck. So, you know, I mean, there were, you know, Mr. Marshalls everywhere, but, you know, I mean, I don't know if it's, I mean, insofar as detention goes and like this whole authority question, I don't know, I mean, it's kind of lazy almost. Like, or at least there's no real intentionality or creativity put into it. It's just like it's you know, being grounded at school pretty much is what it is. And you know, it's funny because I used to rap, right? So if you put me in Saturday detention, I would just smoke weed and write raps. That's fine. I mean, I was okay with that. Like, I don't think it did anything to deter me from doing any of the things I was gonna do anyway. So Yeah, I
But
mean,
let me ask you,
to your point, I don't even think it's a functional discipline on so many different levels. Like,
Mhm,
you know
and
what I
I
mean?
agree. Well, let me ask you, brother, with what you are explaining to us and what we read, do you think that that had helped you along the way to become the man that you are? Still, my views remain the same. It's
You
no
mean like
reflection
detention?
on you, huh?
Detention?
Right, what you experience in detention, you being on detention, that whole scenario. Did it help you along your journey into becoming the man you are, or it's
Yeah, I
just
mean, not in the way that I think they thought it did. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I remember about detention? I remember hanging out with people on break smoking weed. That's what I remember.
wow?
You know about that's what I remember
'Cause
about detention.
I'm gonna tell you, when I went to school, my father, he's like a big community activist, and everybody know him as his name, Mr. Winston. But every time I grew up knowing my dad as being the one that would curse a person out on the same day, and he will fight anybody when it coming to a child, when it's coming to a woman. He don't care if he get his behind beat up, he will fight. He would fight as hard as Malcolm X. That's the type of dad I had.
Mm.
And I remember when my it's so ironic when my brother would get into trouble, which was every week, and he was very I would say he was very vocal, who was out of order when it came to his teacher. And when my father had picked me up from kindergarten, whatever, he went to observe in a sneaky way on how my brother was acting. My brother was out of line. And I don't know back then, but I'm sure my father probably would have gone to jail for child abuse. But my father had beat his behind in front of the whole classroom and teacher and said that if you ever disrespect an adult like that, I'm gonna choke the mess out of you. And I'm serious. It's like every time, and it was so terrifying because the teacher wouldn't say nothing. She'd be in a corner. But my father and that teacher, they were really good friends in Salvador. I never forget it. And my father was no joke. You see my dad, you better straighten up and stuff like that. But it's like, I don't know, when it's coming to school, maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe I'm a female and, we very vain and very emotional. But I think I'm the type of person that would love to hear from a child what's going on. So this way, I wouldn't say resolve his own matter, or her own matter, but to vent out what's frustrating them. And also, when I was in grade school, when you were sent to the principal office or so-called detention, what you do is help out in the office, doing some work. And we go back to work. Going back to work, helping out, seal some envelopes and stuff like that. It wasn't one of those things where you'll sit in a corner or you really punished and have to stay in this class. And really, I don't even know what detention really was about or anything, because I never have gotten there or anything like that, or vaguely remember from the experience of other kids. But I guess the worst type of punishment of the public school I went to is helping out in the office and being productive, having something to do. But then again, it's coming down to us allowing our children to be a voice and to express what's bogging them down, and making them to vent out in certain ways that we don't find idea.
Miss Sister Anna, just know it's gonna cut off in like 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
But I think that that's a great note to end on. Alyssa, are you still there?
I am.
All right, okay. So we've been on for like 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Jesus. But
We-
this was a long chapter.
This was a long chapter. This was a long chapter. You know, so it was good though. I'm glad we knocked it out. I'm gonna upload this tonight.
Okay.
So it should be available for folks. I want to thank you all for being here. I appreciate y'all. Nothing but revolutionary love.
Absolutely.
Any last notes before I count it down?
Yes, Sunday, we are going to have a good time. I'm going to be hosting, be the moderator. Not only we going to read, but we're going to have games. It's going to be fun, and it's going to be a surprise because I'm giving away the gift card. So I welcome everybody to come in, jump on in, not only learn, but just build the confidence, help us be a part of the solution to the revolution. Black power.
All right, y'all. Appreciate you. And we're out in 5, 4, 3, 2, and
Black power.